He'd been paying attention. If I cancel it, he knows something has shifted. Renee needs another week at minimum for documentation that will hold up. I can't afford to spook him before she has what she needs. She looked at him steadily. But I'm not walking my daughter into that parking structure without being honest with you about what I think the risk is. He nodded slowly. Outside from upstairs, they could hear the sound of feet on the floor. Lily up early again, which was her pattern when she was anxious. Though what she was anxious about on this particular Tuesday morning was probably the math test she'd mentioned 3 times the night before and not the adult conversation happening 2 floors below her. Lily stays home that day. Ethan said Victor will notice the deviation. Not if the calendar still shows her there. Change it the morning of with a reason that reads as domestic. She's sick. Teresa has a conflict. Something that sounds like logistics rather than strategy. He paused. He'll adapt, but it gives you the documentation window Renee needs without exposing her. Elena looked at him and me. You go with me. His voice was level. If he's going to move, he moves on you. On the leverage that actually affects a board-level decision. Lily is pressure. You're the decision maker. He met her eyes. If he wants to demonstrate that you're vulnerable enough to negotiate from a position of fear, he needs you in that garage. She understood what he was saying. She also understood what he was offering, which was to stand between her and whatever Victor Cole had decided her vulnerability was worth. You're not 9 men, she said. No, he agreed. I'm not. She looked at him for a moment long. Then she nodded. 3 weeks, she said. 3 weeks, he said. The days between that conversation and the executive review had a strange quality. Outwardly unchanged, inwardly taut. Elena went to work. She took meetings. She reviewed contracts. She sat across from Victor Cole in a Tuesday briefing and discussed supplemental coverage protocols for the upcoming holiday season. And she looked at the man she'd trusted for 14 years and kept her voice completely even and her expression completely open and gave away nothing. It was the hardest professional performance of her life, and she had performed through harder moments than most people would ever encounter. Ethan was a different kind of difficult. He didn't change his behavior in any way that Victor would register. But Elena could see the difference in him now that she was looking for it. A slightly heightened quality of attention, the way his eyes moved through spaces they entered, the way he positioned himself relative to her in public settings. Not nervously, methodically, like someone running calculations that never fully stopped. At home, though, he was careful not to let it show. This was the thing she hadn't expected about him, the deliberate compartmentalization, the ability to be genuinely present with the children in a way that didn't carry the weight of what he was quietly managing around them. On the Wednesday evening of that first week, he sat at the kitchen table for 45 minutes while Lily walked him through her method for folding a paper crane, and he was patient with it in a way that did not look like patience being performed, but like someone who actually had nowhere else to be in that moment. Lily's crane was better than Sam's. Sam had acknowledged this with visible reluctance, and Ethan had said that Sam had more time to practice, and they'd revisit the comparison in a month, and Sam had immediately gone to find more paper, and Lily had looked at Ethan with the specific satisfaction of a child who had just been handed a fair outcome by an adult and found it surprising enough to be worth noticing. You didn't just say mine was better to make me feel good, she said. It was better, he said simply. But he'll catch up. Most adults just say they're both great, Lily observed with the mild contempt of someone who had been subjected to this many times. Most adults underestimate kids. Lily considered this. My dad used to do that, she said with the particular flatness children use when they're describing something they've processed enough to discuss without crying but haven't fully finished feeling. Say that's great, honey, about everything, even the bad ones. Ethan didn't respond with condolence or redirection. He just said, what happened to the bad ones? I threw them away myself, Lily said. The ones I was proud of, I kept. That's the right system, he said. Lily nodded, apparently satisfied, and went back to folding. Elena, who had been standing in the doorway long enough to hear most of this, went quietly back to the hallway before either of them saw her. She stood in the hallway for a moment, just standing. Renee delivered the final documentation on a Thursday afternoon, 10 days before the security review. She sent it in encrypted form and followed up with a call that lasted 40 minutes and covered every thread of the structure she'd assembled. The Ashford connection, the calendar access logs she'd managed to obtain through a source inside COTS IT infrastructure, who did not know what the logs were being used for. 3 payments from a shell entity traced back to Ashford's operational accounts deposited into a brokerage account connected to Victor Cole through his brother-in-law. It was enough, more than enough. You can take this to your legal team and your board, Renee said. Today if you want. Not yet. Elena was at her desk, the encrypted files open on her screen, 14 years of trust compressed into 40 pages of documentation. 3 more days. Elena, he doesn't know we have this. The moment I move on it, he knows. If he has anything planned for the review, tipping him off now might push the timeline. She paused. I need him to believe he still has the upper hand until I have everything I need from that day. Renee was quiet for a moment. What exactly are you planning? I'm planning to do exactly what I was always planning to do. Attend my quarterly security review, demonstrate that I'm not frightened, and let him make whatever move he's been building toward with documentation running, with Ethan in position, and with everything already prepared to bring down around his ears the moment it's over. Another pause longer. That's a significant personal risk. Yes, she said, but Lily won't be there. And I've been taking significant personal risks since I was 24 years old and nobody in this industry believed a woman could run an aerospace company. She closed the file. I'm not hiding in my house while someone dismantles what I built. Renee exhaled. You're going to tell me to be ready to move the moment you give the word. Yes. All right. A beat. Be careful. I have a Navy SEAL, Elena said, and surprised herself slightly with the dryness in her own voice. Renee made a sound that was not quite a laugh. From what you've told me, that might be exactly enough. The morning of the review, Lily woke up with what appeared to be a genuine stomach ache, which Elena felt privately and without expressing it was the universe's way of occasionally making the difficult things slightly less complicated. She settled Lily on the couch with a heating pad and Teresa nearby and her cephalopod encyclopedia kissed her forehead and went to get ready. She found Ethan already in the front hallway, jacket on, checking his phone. He looked up when she came down. How is she? He said, genuinely unwell, which actually helps. She kept her voice low. Teresa knows not to let anyone in, not to confirm our location to anyone who calls, and to contact Renee directly if anything seems wrong. I briefed her this morning, he said. Elena looked at him. When? 6:30, before Lily was up. His voice was calm. Rose steadier than she looks. She needed the context to respond correctly, so I gave it to her. Elena would have an opinion about this later, about the fact that he'd made that call without consulting her. But this was not the moment for that conversation, and the honest assessment was that he'd been right to do it, and she knew it. Fine. What else? I've been in contact with a former colleague. He's positioned in the lobby of the Marsh Tower as of 40 minutes ago. Civilian clothes, no obvious connection to either of us. If anything happens in the parking structure and I need backup response, he can be there in under 2 minutes. He paused. I didn't tell you in advance because I didn't want to give you more variables to manage. I'm telling you now because you should know. She studied him. Who is he? Someone I trust with my life, Ethan said, and his voice had the flat certainty of a man who had had occasion to know exactly who that person was. He won't be needed, but he'll be there. She nodded. All right. Ready? Yes, she said and picked up her bag and they went. The Marsh Aeronautics Tower was 42 stories of glass and steel in the central business district. The kind of building that was built to communicate permanence and authority, which had been entirely intentional when Elena commissioned it 6 years earlier. The underground parking structure ran 3 levels beneath it. Secure access, keycard required, camera coverage on the main drives and elevator banks, but with known gaps on the lower level near the maintenance corridor that Elena had flagged in a facilities report 8 months ago, and that had not yet been addressed. She knew Victor knew about the gaps. She'd discussed them with him at the time. The review was scheduled for 2 o'clock. They arrived at 1:40 and went down to the B2 level to verify the setup, a standard part of any advance, Ethan had told her. The kind of thing that looked routine. The garage was quiet at this hour, the middle of the day cycle when most of the morning arrivals had settled, and the afternoon departures hadn't started. Their footsteps echoed on the concrete. Ethan moved slightly ahead of her, not dramatically, just enough to be between her and anything that came from a forward angle. She'd noticed him do this in other settings, and had never commented on it. It wasn't something he thought about. It was just how he was oriented. They reached the elevator bank and he stopped. She saw it the same moment he did. The elevator panel was dark. Not in the way panels go dark when a car is in use. Dark in the way they go dark when power has been cut. Ethan said quietly, "Don't move." She didn't. He turned a slow, deliberate 180, scanning the level. The fluorescents were still on in the main drive, but the section nearest the maintenance corridor was dimmer than it should have been, and the overhead camera at the northeast corner had its indicator light off. "Staged," he said, still very quiet. "Power cut is selective. They killed the elevator and the northeast camera. Main lighting is on because pulling it would trigger the building's emergency protocols." He looked at her. "They want us contained, not noticed." "How many?" She said, and was surprised by how steady her own voice was. "I don't know yet." He wasn't looking at her. He was watching the gaps between parked cars, the shadow near the maintenance door, the angles. "Stay close behind me. We're going toward the B1 stairwell, not the elevators. That's away from the main entrance. Has a camera that's still active. Once we're on B1, we're on record." And their leverage dropped significantly. He glanced back at her. Trust me, she did. She hadn't known until this moment exactly how completely, but she did. They moved. They'd covered about 30 feet when the maintenance door opened. 2 men came through it, not rushing. They moved with the controlled pace of people who had done this kind of thing before, and who believed they had the situation structured the way they'd planned it. They were dressed unremarkably. One of them was holding something at his side that Elena didn't look at directly, because looking at it would be useful to neither of them right now. "Ms. Marsh," said the one in front. His voice was professionally neutral. "We just need a few minutes of your time." Calumet stopped. Elena stopped behind him. "We don't want any trouble," the man continued. He sounded like someone who said this often, and whose definition of trouble was specific and self-serving. "There's a conversation your board needs to have about the propulsion contract." Mr. Cole thought a quiet setting might be more conducive than Mr. Cole, Ethan said. "Not a question, a notation." The man looked at him for the first time with the slightly recalibrated attention of someone encountering something that doesn't match the briefing. Ethan was standing still, hands at his sides, shoulders easy, weight distributed in a way that would read as relaxed to someone who wasn't paying attention and as something entirely different to someone who was. "This doesn't need to involve you," the man said. "It does," Ethan said. "Walk away." The man looked at his companion. Some negotiation happened in that glance. "There are 2 of us," the man said, and there was a slightly different quality in his voice now. Not threatening exactly, but adjusting the terms. "I know," Ethan said. And then things happened quickly. Later, Elena would reconstruct it in the way people reconstruct things that happen faster than comprehension, in pieces, in order, with gaps. What she knew from being there was this. Ethan moved, and he moved in a way that was nothing like the careful, measured economy of his ordinary movement. It was controlled, and it was precise, and it was over before she fully understood it had begun. The first man went down with the kind of finality that meant he wouldn't be getting up quickly. The second man was larger and had faster reflexes than his companion. And there was a moment she saw it, she would not forget it, where it was not clean, where Ethan took something across his left forearm and made a sound that was short and involuntary. The sound of someone absorbing pain without stopping. He didn't stop. 20 seconds, maybe less. The second man was on the ground. Ethan was breathing harder than usual. He turned to her immediately. "Are you hurt?" "No." She looked at his arm. "You are?" "It's manageable." He was already pulling his phone. "We need to move to B1 and I need to make a call." He looked at her with the straight-on attention that had been there from the first day in her sitting room. "Can you walk fast?" "I can run," she said. "Walking is fine." She fell into step beside him, not behind him. She registered that he'd moved to her left rather than ahead of her, adjusting for the arm. And they went toward the stairwell and he made the call while they moved. 2 words to whoever was on the other end, "Now B1." His former colleague met them at the B1 stairwell door 40 seconds later, came through it at a controlled jog, scanned them both, and said to Ethan, with the familiarity of someone who had read situations like this before, "How bad?" "Forearm, not deep." Ethan looked at Elena. "I need you to call Renee Cho." She was already dialing a chat. The rest of it was not clean because nothing in real situations is clean. It was controlled chaos. Police then building security arriving to find a situation already contained. Then Elena's legal team, then 2 board members she trusted calling in quick succession because word had reached them through channels she didn't fully trace until afterward. Victor Cole resigned by 6:00 that evening in a document submitted through his personal lawyer that was precise and preemptive and confirmed nothing directly. It didn't need to. Diane's documentation did that work. By 8:00 that evening, the information had been formally transmitted to the appropriate regulatory and law enforcement bodies, and the men from the parking structure were in custody, and 3 separate conversations with board members had been completed, and Elena had changed out of her workclothes in her office and was sitting on her couch with a cup of tea that had gone cold, and her hands wrapped around it because they needed something to hold. Ethan's arm had been seen by a doctor, an old friend of his former colleagues, called in without going through any system that Victor might still have eyes on, and was bandaged and described as exactly what he'd said, manageable. He'd come to find her once it was done, knocked on the office door, and when she said come in, he'd stood in the doorway looking like someone who had put everything back where it belonged and was now waiting to see if anything else was needed. "Sit down," she said. He came in and sat in the chair across from her couch. "Your arm," she said. "I've had worse." "That's not comforting." "No," he agreed. "You're too." He nodded. He didn't offer anything to fill the quiet, which was something she had come to value about him more than she could easily explain. "The things you did today," she said after a moment. In the garage, he waited. "You were protecting me," she said. "I know that was the job. I know that's why you were there." "Yes," he said. "But the men on the ground," she looked at him. "You made it a choice about how to handle that. You could have pulled me back toward the main entrance and called it in and waited." "They would have followed," he said. "Probably," she said, "but that's not why you didn't do that." He was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice had a different quality than usual. Still level, but with something underneath it that wasn't the professional steadiness she'd become accustomed to. "No, it's not." She looked at him and he looked back and neither of them said anything more about it because the thing that needed saying had been said in the parking structure when he turned to her with a bruised arm and asked if she was hurt before doing anything else. And it didn't need additional words to mean what it meant. "I want to go home," she said. "I'll get the car," he said. She called Teresa from the elevator and Teresa put the phone on speaker and she could hear Lily's voice in the background asking something about whether her mother was okay and Teresa saying yes she's fine she's coming home and Lily's voice very clearly saying tell her Ethan better be with her. Elena closed her eyes for just a moment. "He is," she said loud enough for Lily to hear. "He's right here." The car was waiting when she came out. Ethan was in the driver's seat, his right arm on the wheel, his left resting in his lap with a careful stillness. He glanced at her when she got in, and then back at the road, and he drove, and she watched the city give way to residential streets, and then to the neighborhood she'd chosen carefully years ago, for its quiet and its good schools, and its distance from the parts of her world that were always asking something of her. The house was lit up when they pulled in. Every downstairs light on, which Teresa did when she was nervous. Lily appeared at the front door before the car had fully stopped. She was in her pajamas and her stomachache appeared to have resolved itself. And she stood in the light from the hallway watching the car with an expression that Elena recognized as the particular held-breath quality of a child who has been managing worry alone for too long. Elena got out and Lily came down the steps and into her arms without speaking. They stood there on the front path in the cold November evening. And after a moment, Lily pulled back enough to look past her mother at Ethan, who had come around the car and was standing a few feet back with his hands in his pockets and his jacket sleeve covering the bandage on his arm. "You're not hurt," Lily said. It was directed at him. "I'm fine," he said. She looked at him for a moment with the precise evaluating attention she gave to things she wasn't sure she believed. They were both people who had learned through necessity to be cautious about things they wanted to move toward them slowly enough that the ground could be tested before weight was put on it. And it was partly the situation which had specific and complicated layers that didn't resolve just because the immediate threat had been removed. He was still technically her head of security. She was still technically his employer. These technicalities became slightly absurd around week 9 when Lily announced at dinner that Ethan had fixed the dishwasher, the grinding noise from the second cycle which had been going on since before he'd arrived. And Elena had looked at him and said, "When did you do that?" And he'd said, "Tuesday. I had 40 minutes. And Lily had said with great authority, he also recocked the upstairs bathroom because it was growing mold behind the fixture. And Sam had nodded in the confirming way of someone who had been present for this. And Elena had looked at Ethan and said, "That's not in your job description." And he'd said, "No, it needed doing." And that had been the entire conversation. She thought about that exchange a lot. In the following days, not because it was significant in itself, but because of what it represented. A man who fixed things that needed fixing without making a point of it, without cataloging it as evidence of his value, without expecting anything back. She had been surrounded for most of her adult life by people who were very aware of their own contributions and wanted her to be equally aware. The alternative was disorienting in a way she hadn't expected. Her ex-husband Daniel had been handsome and ambitious and had understood the financial logic of their marriage. And aerospace eyes with more drive than he'd initially credited, but had not understood or perhaps had not wanted to understand the actual weight of what she was building. He'd left when Lily was 3 with the language of incompatibility and personal growth that people used when the real language was too honest to say in front of lawyers. He saw Lily 4 times a year precisely on the dates his attorney had negotiated and brought gifts that were expensive and exactly wrong, chosen by someone who didn't know her daughter and hadn't invested the attention required to learn. She wasn't angry about this anymore. She had been for a long time in the specific sustained way of someone who has been left holding everything and is exhausted by it. But anger had given way slowly to something more functional. A clear-eyed assessment of what she had and what she didn't and what she actually needed, which turned out to be very different from what she'd thought she needed when she was 26. And building a company and a marriage at the same time, and believing that enough competence in enough areas would add up to a life that made sense. What she actually needed, she was beginning to understand, was considerably less complicated than that. It was a warm kitchen and a working dishwasher and someone who fixed the mold behind the bathroom fixture on a Tuesday because it needed doing. It was the sound of 4 people crowded around one table arguing about whether the octopus or the mantis shrimp had the more interesting sensory system. It was knowing that when she came home the lights would be on. Boy, December arrived with the particular acceleration that December always had. The calendar filling up with obligations that were partly professional and partly social and entirely exhausting in aggregate. Elena navigated it with the controlled efficiency she brought to everything, but she was more aware than usual of the moments that didn't require efficiency. The mornings when she came downstairs and Ethan was already there, and they drank coffee and talked about nothing in particular for 15 minutes before the house woke up. The evenings when the four of them ended up in the living room with some film the children had negotiated for, and everyone gradually stopped watching because the conversation was more interesting than the movie. Sam stayed over for the first time in the second week of December, which happened the way most things in this household happened, gradually and then all at once with a logic that felt inevitable only in retrospect. He and Lily had a school project due the following Monday that required collaboration. And by 8 o'clock, it was apparent that they were nowhere near done and that separating them would produce a worse outcome than finishing. And Teresa had already made up the guest room. And Ethan had looked at Elena and said, "If that's all right." And she'd said, "The room's already made up." And that had been that. At 9:30, Elena went upstairs to check on the project and found them both asleep at the desk. Lily with her head on her arms across the reference books. Sam in the chair with his head tipped back against the wall, his mouth slightly open, a half-folded paper airplane in one hand. The project was about 70% complete. The remaining 30% apparently could wait. She turned off the overhead light and left the desk lamp on and went quietly back out. And in the hallway she found Ethan standing with his arms crossed and an expression she had only recently learned to read correctly. Not the professional stillness, but the other thing, the quieter thing that came from somewhere personal. "They fell asleep," she said softly. "I figured." He looked toward the door. "I'll check if Sam needs anything." "I already covered him." She had with the blanket from the foot of the bed without really thinking about it. "He's fine." Ethan looked at her. "Old habit," she said. "I've been doing it since Lily was born, checking on sleeping children and adjusting blankets for no reason." "It's a good habit," he said. They stood in the hallway outside the door for a moment, both of them quiet. The house settled around them in the particular way of houses where everyone is finally asleep. Downstairs, a clock ticked. The heating system made its small sounds. Nothing was required of either of them right now, which was a rarer condition than either would have liked. "I've been thinking about something," Elena said. He waited. "The program," she said, "the restructuring of the security division. I've been talking to the company's legal team about establishing something more formal, a transition support program for former military personnel moving into civilian security roles. Single parents specifically." She paused. "I keep thinking about what you told me about why you left, that you didn't want to be a father." Sam knew through phone calls. "Yeah," he said carefully. "There are a lot of people who made the same choice and came home and found that civilian life didn't have infrastructure for what they know how to do. Not at the level they're capable of." She looked at him. "I want to build something real, not a PR gesture. And I want someone to run it who understands both sides. The military background and the parenting calculation." He was very still. "That's not a job offer yet," she said quickly. "It's nowhere near being a concrete thing. I'm still in the early stages of figuring out whether the structure makes sense, but I wanted to." She stopped. "I wanted you to know I was thinking about it because it came from thinking about you, about your situation, about Sam." He looked at her for a moment. "Why are you telling me now?" "Because it felt dishonest not to." She was direct about this. "You've been honest with me since the day you walked in. It seemed like the minimum I owed you." He nodded slowly. He looked at the floor, then back up at her. "If it becomes concrete," he said, "I'd like to hear about it. I thought you might have beat." Then, with the specificity that she had come to understand was how he showed things he wasn't going to say outright. "I'd need Sam to stay in his current school. It's been good for him. I don't want to disrupt that. The program would be based here," she said. "No relocation." He exhaled just slightly, just enough for her to notice. "Okay." "Okay," she said. Neither of them moved for a moment. The clock downstairs ticked. Something in the room behind them, one of the children, impossible to tell which, shifted and resettled in sleep. "I should let you get to bed," he said. "Probably," she agreed. But neither of them left immediately. And in the hallway light, she looked at him and thought about the parking structure. about him turning to her with a bandaged arm, asking if she was hurt, about him sitting at a table 10 feet from her crying daughter and folding paper because it was the thing that would actually help rather than the thing that looked like helping. She had spent years learning to tell the difference between those two things. She had mostly stopped believing she would ever find someone who didn't require the lesson. "Good night, Ethan," she said. "Good night," he said. She went to her room. He went down the hall to the small study where he'd taken to sitting in the evenings when the rest of the house was asleep. And if he sat there longer than usual tonight with the lights on and the book he'd been reading unopened in his hands, that was not something anyone saw. Christmas that year was not what Elena had planned, which meant it was better than she'd expected. She'd planned a quiet week, a few select invitations, Lily's school concert, a dinner for the household staff on the 23rd. What actually happened was that Sam's school concert was on the same evening as Lily's, different venues, and the solution they arrived at, 2 cars, split coverage, everyone attending both, had somehow resulted in a full week of overlapping plans and shared meals, and the gradual unannounced accumulation of small traditions. On the 22nd, they drove 40 minutes outside the city to a tree farm because Lily had learned from somewhere that cutting your own tree was an experience and had campaigned for it with the sustained focus she brought to causes she believed in. The farm was cold and crowded and the trees were mostly picked over by the time they got there. And Sam's boots were not waterproof, and his socks were soaked through within 20 minutes. And Lily chose a tree that was slightly too tall for the living room ceiling and refused to reconsider. And Ethan cut it down with the focused economy of someone who had performed more demanding physical tasks than this and found it somewhat straightforward. And by the time they got it back to the house, everyone was cold and tired. And Sam had developed a specific philosophical position about the relative merits of artificial trees, which he delivered in a wet-socked intermittent monologue for most of the drive home. It was not a smooth or elegant afternoon in the living room trying to fit a tree that was 6 and too tall into a stand that kept slipping on the hardwood floor while Lily directed from the couch with the confidence of someone who had never done this before but had clear opinions about how it should be done. Elena looked around at the specific chaos of it. Ethan on his knees under the tree trying to level the stand. Sam now in dry socks but still elaborating his artificial tree position to Teresa, who was being patient about it. Lily on her feet now despite the direction to stay seated because something about the left side of the tree required her physical presence. And she felt something that she hadn't felt in this house for a very long time. It felt lived in, not maintained, not managed. Lived in the way houses are supposed to feel, with the evidence of people actually occupying the space rather than moving carefully through it. "It's crooked," Lily announced. "I know," Ethan said from under the tree. "Give me a minute. The left side is higher." "I know. If you turn the base counterclockwise," Lily, his voice muffled by branches. "What?" "Give me a minute." She gave him 30 seconds. Then, "Is it better?" A pause. Then he came out from under the tree, pine needles in his hair, and stood back and looked at it. "It's about as straight as it's going to get." Lily tilted her head. "It leans a little to the right." "Yes." "Is that okay?" He looked at her with the expression of a man who had drawn a line and was prepared to defend it. "Yes, that's okay." She considered this. "I think it has character," she said in the tone of someone who has decided to adopt the outcome as intentional. "It does," Elena said, coming to stand beside her daughter and looking at the imperfect, slightly too tall, mildly lopsided tree that was somehow exactly right. "It absolutely has character." Sam looked up from his conversation with Teresa. "I still think artificial is more practical." "Noted," Ethan said. "I'm just saying for next year." "Sam, what?" "The tree is fine." Sam made the face of someone who has not been convinced but understands the conversation is over and went back to telling Teresa about the load-bearing advantages of PVC construction. January arrived, and with it the particular quality of January mornings where everyone in the house was slightly depleted from December and slightly unwilling to admit it. School resumed, work resumed, the pace returned, and with the pace came the moments of friction that the holiday's generous calendar had smoothed over. Schedule conflicts. Lily's school pickup changing 3 times in 1 week. Ethan and Elena disagreeing about the new security firm's protocols. Neither of them entirely wrong. Neither of them entirely comfortable being challenged by someone whose judgment they respected. "You're doing it again," Ethan said one morning in the hallway when she'd overridden a coverage decision he'd made without telling him she was going to. "I own the company," she said. "You do," he said evenly. "And when it's a company decision, I'll defer to you. When it's a security decision, I need you to at least tell me before you change the plan." She looked at him. He looked back. This was the thing about people who were both accustomed to being right. They needed different things from each other than from people who weren't. And working out what those things were took longer than either of them wanted it to. "I didn't think it required consultation," she said with slightly less certainty than she'd had 30 seconds ago. "It did," he said simply without accusation. She exhaled. "All right. Thank you." "Don't thank me. Thank me. I'm going to be bad at this sometimes." "I know." And there was something in the way he said it. Not resignation, not condescension, but the genuine settled knowledge of someone who had already accounted for this and decided it didn't change anything. That was more disarming than any reassurance would have been. She went to her office. She sat down. She reviewed the contract she'd meant to review an hour ago and kept reading the same paragraph because she was thinking about the hallway, about the way he said "I know" in a way that sounded like it covered a lot of ground. It was Lily who named the thing first, which was typical. Lily had always been more willing to say the actual thing than the people around her, possibly because she was 7 and hadn't yet learned the particular adult skill of talking around what you meant. It was a Saturday in late January. Sam was there. They'd all been at the Botanical Conservatory again, a repeat of the first Saturday, now apparently a standing plan. And they'd come home for dinner, and Teresa had made something that required more dishes than the kitchen usually saw in a week. And all 4 of them were crowded around the table eating and talking about whether a Venus flytrap could theoretically eat something as large as a hamster, which Sam had framed as a research question, and which Lily was addressing with scientific seriousness. "It couldn't," Lily said. "The trap isn't large enough and it doesn't have the digestive capacity." "But hypothetically," Sam said. "Hypothetically is still bound by physical constraints." "Sam, you don't know that." "I literally just explained." "Okay," Ethan said, "the hamster is fine. Move on." Lily pointed her fork at Sam with the authority of someone who has been conceded the point by a third party. Sam ate his food with dignity. The conversation moved the way dinner conversations did through several topics before landing on something Lily's teacher had said about family structures. The school was doing a unit on what families looked like. A modern and deliberately inclusive curriculum that Elena had actually reviewed before enrollment and approved. "Mrs. Petrov says families are whoever you live with and take care of," Lily said. "And whoever takes care of you." "That's a good definition," Elena said. "I think so, too." Lily ate a piece of broccoli with the mechanical focus of someone fulfilling a vegetable obligation. "So, we're kind of like a family." The table was quiet for exactly 1 beat. "Because you live here and you take care of us," Lily continued, looking at Ethan with the straightforward directness she brought to factual statements. "And we kind of take care of you too, me and Mom. And Sam comes here a lot." She looked at Sam. "You're basically here all the time." "I'm not here all the time," Sam said. "You were here 4 Saturdays in a row." "That's not all the time." "It's pretty close." Elena looked at Ethan across the table. He was looking at his plate with an expression that was carefully neutral in the specific way of someone managing something that wanted to be more than neutral. "I think Lily has a point," Elena said, and she said it lightly in the tone of someone agreeing with a factual observation because that was what it was. An observation, not a question, not a demand, just a 7-year-old naming the thing that was already true. Ethan looked up at her. She looked back. "Sam," Lily said, "if your dad and my mom got married, would that make you my brother?" "Lily," Elena said. "I'm just asking what the word would be." "Stepbrother," Sam said with the decisive authority of someone who has looked this up. He paused. Or just brother, depending on what people want to call it. Lily nodded as if this confirmed something she'd been working out. I'd call it brother, she said. Me, too, Sam said. Elena looked at her daughter, the 7-year-old person who had spent 2 years pressing herself against walls in the presence of strangers, and who was now sitting at a crowded kitchen table, discussing family nomenclature with the ease of someone who had always lived this way. She looked at Ethan, who was looking at his son with an expression she recognized because she had her own version of it. The specific helplessness of a parent watching a child be braver and clearer about things than the adults around them. Clears throat. We should probably let the adults have some conversations first, Elena said carefully to Lily. Before we get to the words part, Lily appeared to find this reasonable. Okay, she ate another piece of broccoli. But not too many conversations. Adults take forever. Sam nodded in sincere agreement. Ethan finally looked at Elena and something moved across his face that she hadn't seen before or had seen in pieces in small amounts in the parking structure and the hallway and the evenings in the kitchen when the house was quiet. But not like this. Not this directly. Not in full daylight with the dinner dishes still on the table and both children watching with the patient attention of people who have already decided how they'd like this to turn out. She's not wrong, he said, about the adults taking forever. Elena held his gaze. No, she said. She's usually not. The table went back to dinner. Sam finished his broccoli without being asked, which Teresa noticed and acknowledged with a small, quiet nod in his direction. Lily began a new inquiry into whether seagrass qualified as a plant or something else. She told Ethan on a Wednesday evening they were in the kitchen. They were always in the kitchen for the conversations that mattered, which she'd noticed and which she thought said something about kitchens and what they were actually for. She walked him through the structure, the funding, the scope, the timeline. He listened the way he listened to everything completely without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. You built this, he said. The team built it. I directed it. Elena. He said her name the way he said things he wanted her to actually hear. You built this. She looked at him. I had good material to work from. He looked at the table, then back at her. When would it start? September. Which gives us time to hire the other 5 positions, set up the intake process, and if you want the director role, transition you out of the household detail in a way that doesn't leave a gap. He was quiet again longer this time. Sam stays in his school. She said, the office is 12 minutes from here. The role pays 30% more than what you're making now with benefits that include dependent coverage and educational support. She paused. I'm not trying to buy your answer. I'm trying to make sure the answer can be yes if you want it to be. He looked at her steadily. Why does it matter to you whether the answer can be yes? It was a direct question and it deserved a direct answer because you gave up a career trajectory that would have made you financially independent for the rest of your life because you didn't want to be a father. No one knew through photographs and you've been doing work since then that's beneath what you're capable of because the alternative required more absence than you were willing to accept. She held his gaze. You made the right call and you've been paying for it in ways you don't complain about. I want to offer you something that doesn't ask you to choose. The kitchen was very quiet. That's he started and stopped. Started again. That's a significant thing to do for someone. You're not someone, she said simply. And then because they were both people who appreciated precision, you know what I mean. Yeah, he said. I know what you mean. He accepted the role 3 days later by text at 6:47 in the morning, which was before she was fully awake, and the text said, yes, September. Thank you. And then after a pause that she could see in the timestamp gap for all of it, she read it twice in bed with her coffee getting cold on the nightstand and felt something so clean and uncomplicated that she almost didn't know what to do with it. April was when the thing between them finally moved from where it had been sitting to somewhere it could be called by its actual name. And it happened characteristically without drama. It was a Tuesday. Lily had a school event, a science showcase, where she presented her project on bioluminescence in deep-sea organisms, which she had been preparing for 6 weeks with an intensity that had occasionally required Elena to gently suggest that 7 hours of preparation for a 45-minute event might be approaching diminishing returns. Lily had acknowledged this observation and continued preparing. Sam had asked to come. This had required a conversation about whether Sam attending Lily's school event was something Lily wanted, which it turned out she did very much, and whether Ethan was comfortable with the deviation from his usual Tuesday schedule, which he was, and whether Teresa needed the car that evening, which she didn't, so all 4 of them went. The science showcase was in the school gymnasium, which smelled like every school gymnasium in every season, and the presentations were arranged on folding tables in a large square around the perimeter. Lily's table had a poster she'd made herself, not entirely straight, the letters slightly uneven, the photographs of anglerfish printed from the school library and slightly blurry, and a small demonstration lamp she'd rigged with Rosa's help to approximate bioluminescent glow, which worked about 60% of the time and failed the other 40% in ways that Lily had decided gave the presentation a live element. She presented to her classmates and their parents for 22 minutes, which was significantly longer than she'd been allocated, and her teacher had tried twice to signal the time limit, and both times Lily had absorbed the signal and continued because she had 2 more points to make, and they were important. Elena stood at the back of the small crowd around Lily's table and watched her daughter hold forth about the light-producing organs of the angler fish and felt the specific pride of a parent watching a child be unambiguously completely themselves. She became aware that Ethan had moved to stand beside her. "She went overtime," he said quietly. "She always goes overtime. Is that a problem?" Her teacher gave up trying to stop her in October. He made a sound that was almost a laugh. Beside him, Sam was watching Lily's presentation with the expression of someone who had heard most of this before but was still interested, which Elena thought said something genuinely good about his character. When Lily finished, concluding with a summary statement about the evolutionary advantages of producing your own light in an environment where external light didn't exist, which landed with more weight than she probably intended. There was applause and she accepted it with the grave composure of someone who had done the work and found the recognition appropriate. She found them at the back of the crowd and came directly to Sam. "Did you see the lamp?" she said. "It worked 4 times. "I counted 5, he said. She looked at him with sharp attention. "Are you sure? The 3rd one you said didn't count because it flickered." "It did flicker. It still produced light." Lily appeared to genuinely reconsider her count. "Okay. 5. Sam looked satisfied. This was Elena had come to understand the specific economy of their friendship. Lily was usually right about facts, and Sam was usually the one who caught the things she'd miscounted or miscategorized. And both of them had come to rely on this division of labor with the easy confidence of people who have found someone whose strengths cover their gaps. Afterward, walking to the car in the April evening, Lily took her mother's hand on the left and Sam's hand on the right, and Sam didn't pull away, and Ethan walked on Elena's other side, and they crossed the school parking lot 4 across, which required some navigation around other families and at least one minivan, and at some point, Elena's shoulder bumped Ethan's arm, and neither of them moved apart. At the car, Lily looked up at her mother. "That was good," she said with the assessing finality of someone who had reviewed the evening and found it satisfactory. "It was," Elena agreed. "The lamp worked 5 times, Lily said. "Sam was right." "Sam usually is," Ethan said. Sam received this with visible pleasure and climbed into the car. Lily climbed in after him, and Elena was reaching for the door handle when Ethan's hand got there first. Not hurriedly, just present, holding it open. She looked at him. He looked at her. The parking lot was busy around them. Other families moving to their cars. The ordinary noise of an ordinary school evening. "You should have seen her 6 months ago," Elena said quietly. "She would have presented to 3 people maximum before she needed to stop." "I know," he said. "That's because of you and Sam." He shook his head slightly. "That's because of her. He paused. "We were there." She looked at him for a moment in the parking lot light. This man with pine needles in his hair and a slightly crooked Christmas tree and a bandaged arm that he'd called manageable and a son who counted lamp flickers to make sure his friend got credit for all 5. And she thought, there it is. That's the word for it. She didn't say it in the parking lot. The moment wasn't right for the full weight of it, but she held it and he seemed to know she was holding it. And they got in the car and drove home through the April evening, and that was enough for tonight. He asked her in May. He asked her in the courtyard of the Hargrove Science Museum on a Saturday morning, which was where all of this had begun, where a paper airplane had flown across a fountain to a crying child who had stopped crying, where something had started that neither of them had understood was starting. Elena had not known this was coming. She would later insist on this because it was true, and also because she had a personal policy about not pretending to be more composed about things than she actually was. She had not known. She had thought they were at the museum because Sam had a new enthusiasm for the geology exhibit that had opened in March. And Lily had wanted to revisit the deep-sea display with the technical eye of someone who had now presented on the subject. And it was Saturday, and the museum was where they went. They'd been there for 2 hours. The children were in the deep-sea hall on the other side of the building with Teresa, who had come along because the Saturday outings had expanded in that gradual accretive way. Elena and Ethan were in the courtyard. The same courtyard with the same fountain with the bronze fish that Lily had told her about. The one that looked slightly wrong for the species. It was a warm May morning. The fountain was running. There were other people around, families and couples and school groups, the ordinary Saturday crowd. Ethan had been quieter than usual for the last hour. She'd noticed but not pressed. He stopped walking at the edge of the fountain. She stopped beside him. He looked at the fountain for a moment and then at her. "This is where it started," he said. "I know," she said. "Lily told me about the fountain." "Which fish it was?" "The best." She said it looked like someone had described a base over the phone, and the sculptor had never actually seen one. Elena almost smiled. "She's not wrong. She's usually not." He looked at the fountain again. He had his hands in his jacket pockets and she could see from the angle that one hand was closed around something. She noticed and didn't say anything. "I've been trying to figure out how to do this in a way that doesn't." He stopped. Tried again. "I'm not good at this part, the words part." "Ethan, I know what I want to say. He exhaled. "I spent 3 years after Claire telling myself that the reason I wasn't moving toward anything was Sam, that I was protecting him, and that was partly true." He looked at her now, "but it was also that I was scared, and I hadn't been scared of much in a long time. The things I used to be scared of were things I trained for this." He stopped again. She waited. "I don't have training for this," he said. "I have a 7-year-old who told me 2 months ago that I take too long and I should just ask you." Elena put her hand over her mouth. "She's not wrong," he said. "No," Elena managed. "She's usually not." He took his hand out of his pocket. In it was a ring, simple, a single stone. Nothing ostentatious. The kind of ring chosen by someone who knew the person it was for and knew she didn't need things to be large to be significant. He held it the way he held most things, steadily, without performance. "I know this is fast," he said. "It's been 14 months, she said. "I know. Ethan." She said his name and he stopped. "Ask me." He looked at her. "Elena, will you marry me?" It wasn't quite a question the way he said it. It had the quality of something he'd already thought through from every angle and arrived at as the correct conclusion, which was, she thought, exactly how he would ask. She opened her mouth to answer from behind her clearly and without hesitation at a volume that reached at least half the courtyard. "Yes." She turned around. Lily was standing 15 feet away with Sam beside her. Both of them having apparently abandoned the deep-sea exhibit in Teresa at some point in the last few minutes. And Lily's face had the expression of someone who had been waiting for this specific moment and was not sorry to have arrived in time for it. "Lily," Elena said. "Sorry," Lily said in a tone that was not remotely sorry. Sam beside her was trying to contain an expression that he was not successfully containing. Elena looked at her daughter, then at Sam, then at Ethan, who was looking at his son with the expression of a man who had attempted a plan and was reviewing where the plan had deviated from the expected course. "How long have you two known?" Elena asked. "Sam found the ring 2 weeks ago," Lily said. "I didn't find it," Sam said. "It was in a jacket pocket, and I was hanging up the jacket." "You found it," Lily said. "He told you," Elena said. Immediately, Sam confirmed without guilt. Ethan pinched the bridge of his nose. Elena looked at him. He looked at her and she thought about all of it. The parking lot and the kitchen and the pine needles and the bandaged arm and the lopsided Christmas tree and the 5-lamp flickers and a paper airplane with uneven wings that flew really far. And she thought about her daughter at 7 years old, pressing her lips to her ear and saying, "I know him, and I really like him." And she thought about how much had been asked of both of them, and how much they had both quietly carried, and how the carrying had not diminished them, but had brought them somehow here to a museum courtyard in May, with 2 children who had conspired to be present, and a ring held steadily in an unshaking hand. "Yes," she said. "Obviously, yes." Lily made a sound that was not a word. Sam said, "I told you she'd say yes immediately." "She took longer than I thought." Lily said, "You said yes before she could answer." "That's different from her taking long." "Okay," Ethan said, and he put the ring on Elena's hand, and both children watched this with the focused attention they gave to things that mattered. And the courtyard of the Harrow Science Museum went on around them in its ordinary Saturday way, the fountain running and the light coming down warm through the early May sky. They married in September on the same weekend the Marsh Veterans Family Initiative opened its doors. This was not a coincidence. Elena had aligned the dates deliberately, not for symbolism. She was not by nature a symbolic thinker, but because September was when Ethan's role as director began, and it seemed right that the 2 things that marked the end of one arrangement and the beginning of another should happen in the same breath. The ceremony was in the back garden of the house. 40 people, immediate family and close friends, and a handful of colleagues whose presence felt earned rather than obligatory. No elaborate production. Teresa had an opinion about the flower arrangements that Elena had learned to accept unconditionally. The caterer was a woman from the neighborhood who had once left a card in their mailbox and whose food Lily had approved after a tasting that she had requested and conducted with professional gravity. Lily wore a dress she'd chosen herself, which was pale green and slightly too formal for a garden wedding and exactly right for her. She'd objected to the original choice on the grounds that she'd be sitting in it for hours and needed to be able to move. And the compromise had taken 3 weeks and resulted in something that was both appropriate and Lily, which was the only outcome that was going to work. Sam carried the ring. He was 8 now, had turned 8 in July at a birthday party that had included a tent in the backyard and more children than Elena had originally planned for and a cake shaped like a paper airplane that had been Lily's idea. And that the baker had executed with unexpected technical precision. I was 8, and he carried the ring with the solemn responsibility of someone who understood the assignment, though he had also that morning triple-checked that it was in the box before they left the house, which Ethan had witnessed and not commented on, but which had produced briefly the look of a father watching his son be more careful than the situation required, and finding that enormously privately good. The ceremony was short. The officiant was an old friend of Ethan's, a woman named Sandra, who'd worked in civilian family advocacy since leaving service, and who had agreed immediately when he called. She had a dry, specific wit, and a delivery that made the words feel actual rather than performed, which was what both of them had wanted. They wrote their own vows. This had been Elena's suggestion, and Ethan's reluctant agreement, and neither of them had shown the other what they'd written beforehand. Elena went first. She stood in the September garden with the light coming through the leaves. At the angle it came through only in September when it was still warm but beginning to remember what it would become. And she looked at Ethan in his dark jacket with the pine needle-free hair. And she said, "I spent a long time believing that being strong meant not needing anything. That the right version of my life was the one I could manage entirely on my own without gaps, without dependence, without anyone close enough to see the places where I was tired." She paused. "I was wrong about that. Not about being strong, about what strength actually is." She looked at him steadily. "You never asked me to be less than I am." You asked me to let someone stand next to me. That's different. And it took me a while to understand the difference. Another pause. Shorter. I understand it now. And I'm not going to be good at all of this all the time. I'm going to be difficult and overbooked and occasionally convinced I'm right when I'm not. A small honest breath. But I'm going to show up every day for you and for Sam. The way you showed up for me and for Lily before anyone asked you to. She pressed her lips together. That's what I've got. It's not a poem, but it's true. 40 people were quiet. Lily in the front row was watching her mother with an expression that was trying very hard to remain composed and was not succeeding, which was the most openly she had cried in public in 2 years, and which she would later refer to as the light bothering her eyes, a claim that no one challenged. Ethan looked at her for a moment before he spoke. I have been careful most of my life, he said, and his voice was level, but only just the levelness of someone using a skill with full awareness of using it. Careful in my work, careful with Sam, careful about what I let matter, because I'd learned that the things that matter are the things that can hurt you. He paused. And then I sat down 10 feet from a crying kid in a museum courtyard, and everything I was being careful about stopped being the point. He looked at her. I didn't know who you were. I didn't know what that afternoon was going to become. I just knew that a little girl was scared and that nobody else had stopped a beat. That's how I've always known what the right thing was. Not from planning, from what I couldn't walk past. He stopped for a moment. You are the thing I couldn't walk past. He said, you and Lily, and I'm not going to be easy to live with all the time. I don't talk enough about the things I'm feeling and I fix things around the house without asking and I will always choose the children first if it comes to that. He looked at her, but I will not leave. I know how to stay and I'm going to spend the rest of my life staying. Sandra said the words. They said the words. Sam delivered the ring with both hands in a gravity that made Sandra briefly lose her composure. Lily, when given the opportunity to voice any objection, said instead loudly and preemptively, obviously not. And there was laughter that broke the held breath quality of the afternoon, and released it into something warmer. Ethan kissed his wife in the September garden, while 40 people who had earned the right to be there made the kind of noise people make when something has been a long time coming. That evening, after the guests had gone and the caterer had cleared the garden, and Teresa had put the leftover cake in containers, with the focused efficiency of someone who understood the sacred importance of good cake, the 4 of them sat on the back steps in the dark. This was not a planned conclusion to the day. It had happened gradually, as things did. Sam had come out first because he'd wanted to look at the stars, a recent interest sparked by a library book. Lily had followed because she didn't like being the only one inside. Ethan had come because the children were outside and he was constitutionally unable not to know where the children were. Elena had come because the kitchen had emptied out and the step was where everyone was. They sat in a loose arrangement. Nobody particularly planned. Lily leaning against Elena. Sam beside Ethan with his star chart open in his lap, though it was too dark to read it without a light. That star, Sam said, pointing at something. That one's Vega. How do you know? Lily said the book. It's one of the brightest in the northern sky. Lily looked at it. It doesn't look brighter than the others. Brightness in astronomy is relative to Sam. What? I believe you. Lily said, I'm just saying it doesn't look different. Sam appeared to find this a reasonable distinction. A lot of important things don't look different from the outside, he said, with the slightly accidental profundity of children who haven't yet learned to edit themselves. Nobody said anything for a moment. Above them, the September sky was clear and dense with stars, the kind of sky that the city didn't usually offer, but that appeared occasionally when the weather was right and the light was low. The garden smelled like late summer and the remnants of the afternoon, cut flowers and something sweet from the caterer's dessert table. Is this what it's always going to be like? Lily asked. It was directed at no one specific. What do you mean? Elena said. Like this. All 4 of us. She wasn't asking with anxiety. It was the same clear factual tone she used for scientific questions. The tone of wanting to understand the actual shape of something. Is this what a regular Tuesday is going to be like, except with stars? Ethan looked at Elena over the top of Lily's head. She looked back. Pretty much, Elena said. Lily appeared to process this. Good, she said. And then she leaned more comfortably against her mother and went back to looking at the stars with the satisfied attention of someone who has confirmed the information they needed. Sam found Vega again and explained to Lily why it would eventually become the North Star in roughly 12,000 years due to the axial precession of the Earth. And Lily asked 3 follow-up questions that Sam answered with the patient thoroughness of someone who had found his audience. And above them, the stars did what stars do, which is remain entirely indifferent to human arrangements while being looked at anyway, which is perhaps the most honest thing about them. Elena sat in the garden with her husband's shoulder warm against hers and her daughter's weight against her side and thought about the things she had believed at various points in her life about what she was building and what it was for. The company which was real and significant and had employed thousands of people and would employ thousands more. The walls she'd built carefully around the parts of herself that couldn't afford to be reached. The long exhausting vigilance of being both the person who earned the money and the person who was the parent with no one to hand either task to at the end of a hard day. She had built those walls because the alternative had seemed naive. And she had been right about some of it. There were things you couldn't afford to leave unprotected, things that required vigilance precisely because the world didn't organize itself around your vulnerability. But she had been wrong about what the walls were for. You didn't build walls to live inside them. You built them so that the space inside could be safe enough to leave unguarded sometimes. So that inside the walls there could be a kitchen table and a lopsided Christmas tree and a boy counting lamp flickers and a 7-year-old pressing her lips to her mother's ear and saying, "I know him," before any of the adults had caught up. The things worth protecting were the ones inside. And the things inside, it turned out, didn't need to be protected from everything. They needed to be tended, shown up for, fixed when they broke like a grinding dishwasher without making a production of the fixing. Needed sometimes just 4 people on a back step in September looking at stars that didn't look different from each other, but were. She thought about a photograph she'd found 2 weeks earlier in the process of reorganizing the house's entryway for the life it was going to contain now. A photo from Lily's 2nd birthday. Elena alone with her, the 2 of them. Daniel already moving toward the door in every sense. Elena had looked so determined in that photograph, so certain that determination would be enough. It had been enough to get here. It just wasn't going to be what kept her here. Months later, on a rainy Sunday, when the house was full and loud, and everyone was slightly underslept from a late Friday and still recovering, Lily found an old box of photographs in the study. This was not an unusual thing for Lily to find. She had a habit of exploring the house's less trafficked spaces with the systematic curiosity of a naturalist. And the study had 3 closets whose content she had been gradually cataloging since November with Rose's permission. The box was from the early years of the company. Elena's office, a board meeting, a charity event, and filling most of the back third of the box, photographs from the household security arrangements of the previous 14 months. Lily sat cross-legged on the study floor and went through them. She knew some of these faces vaguely, the ones who had been here long enough to be a recurring presence before she'd made herself scarce. She didn't know the others, the ones who had lasted days. She looked at each face with the careful attention she gave to things, trying to remember, filing them away. She counted 9 faces. 9 men looking varying degrees of formal and professional, standing in the foyer or the driveway or positioned near the garden gate. She got to the end of the household photos and sat with the stack in her hands. Then she went to the box of more recent photos. Teresa kept them in an adjacent box organized chronologically and found what she was looking for about 2/3 of the way through. Ethan in the kitchen on what looked like one of the first Saturdays, his back partially to the camera, both children at the table with the chessboard between them. She held this photograph for a moment, then she held it next to the stack of 9. She counted through the 9 again just to be sure. 10. She sat with both stacks in her hands, the 9 and the 1, and looked at them for a while in the gray Sunday light from the study window. Then she put the 9 photographs back in the old box and closed the lid. She kept the 10th. She brought it downstairs to the kitchen where Elena was at the table with her laptop. And Ethan was making something on the stove, and Sam was at the counter attempting a paper crane with the focused intensity of someone who had raised his standards since October and now refused to accept anything less than symmetrical folds. Lily put the photograph on the table beside her mother's laptop. Elena looked at it, then at Lily. "I counted," Lily said. Elena looked at the photograph again. Ethan's back, the chessboard, the 2 children, the ordinary Saturday kitchen. "There were 9 before him," Lily said. "I remember most of them. They were fine." She paused with the precision of someone being accurate rather than unkind. "But they weren't right." "No," Elena said quietly. "They weren't." "He was right," Lily said. From the first day, she looked at the photograph. "I just knew." From the stove, Ethan glanced over his shoulder at the 2 of them, reading the quality of the conversation without hearing it, the way he'd learned to read most things in this house. "Everything okay?" he said. "Yes," Lily said. She picked up the photograph and looked at it one more time. Then she took it to the small corkboard near the hallway door where Teresa pinned things. School schedules, grocery lists, appointment reminders, and pinned it there in the center where it would be seen. Number 10. She stepped back and looked at it. Sam looked up from his crane. "What's that?" "A photograph?" Lily said, "Of what?" "Of us," she said simply. "One of the first ones." Sam looked at it. Then at his father, then at Elena, then back at the photograph with the expression of someone who had arrived in this family through a side door and was still occasionally surprised in the best way to find himself so thoroughly inside it. "We should take a new one," he said. "So there's an after." "We should," Elena agreed. Ethan turned from the stove, dish towel over one shoulder, and looked at the 4 of them. His son with a half-folded crane, his wife with her hands still resting on the table near where the photograph had been. Lily standing with her arms loosely crossed, looking at the corkboard with the satisfied expression of someone who has finished a calculation and found it correct. He looked at the photograph on the board. He thought about a museum courtyard and a box of paper squares and a little girl who had been trying very hard not to keep crying. He thought about sitting down 10 feet away because approaching too fast would have been the wrong thing. He thought about all the things he had ever been trained to do, the things that had required precision and speed and the willingness to move through danger without hesitating, and how none of it had mattered as much in the end as knowing when to sit still and fold something small and let the distance close on its own terms. He thought about Claire the way he always did, not with the sharp-edged grief of the first years, but with the softer, more integrated ache of someone who carries a person with them rather than behind them. She would have found this funny, he thought. All of it. The 9 bodyguards, the false calendar entry, the parking structure, the lopsided tree, the proposal with the 8-year-old ruined surprise assist. She would have sat across from him at a table very much like this one and delivered a deadpan verdict on the entire sequence with her absolute straight face. "You had to almost get beaten up in a parking garage," she would have said before you figured it out. He would have said it wasn't like that. She would have looked at him. He would have said maybe a little like that. And she would have laughed, and that would have been enough because that was what it was. Enough. Not perfect, never finished. Always requiring something. Effort or patience or the willingness to sit down 10 feet away and wait, but enough. "After breakfast," he said, "we'll take the new one." Lily nodded. Sam went back to his crane. Elena looked at her husband across the kitchen and thought, here's the thing about love that nobody tells you when you're young and afraid of needing it. It doesn't arrive as rescue. It doesn't come in at the last minute and solve the thing you couldn't solve alone. It arrives the way Ethan had arrived, quietly when the situation called for someone to sit down nearby and fold something small and ordinary and wait without pressure for the scared thing to come closer when it was ready. It arrives as patience that doesn't perform itself as patience. It arrives as a man who fixes the dishwasher on a Tuesday because it needed doing. And if you're very lucky and also paying attention, you recognize it before someone has to ruin the surprise by shouting yes. The rain came down outside. The kitchen was warm on the stove. Whatever. Ethan was making smelled like Saturday mornings, though it was Sunday, which meant the week was allowed to start a little gently for once. Lily went to help Sam with the crane's final fold, and their two heads bent together over the paper, and the photograph stayed on the board where she'd put it, the 10th and the last, the one that didn't need to be followed by another. Because the 10th hadn't simply been the end of a long, frustrating count. He'd been the beginning of everything after.